Back, pour it up. Today is National Sangria Day, and did you know New Mexico is the oldest wine-producing region in the United States? Well, there is no better place to celebrate than here in the land of enchantment. We're joined this morning by historian Rafi Andonian, finding out more about National Sangria Day and the history behind winemaking here in New Mexico. Good morning, Rafi.
Good morning.
Thanks so much for being here with us this morning. When did winemaking in New Mexico start?
Well, winemaking in New Mexico traces its origins to winemaking in Mexico.
Okay.
So we have to contextualize it, okay? So the answer is really in the 16th and 17th centuries, but let's look at what's going on around the world and in Mexico at the time. So in the 1550s, in Mexico, you have winemaking beginning. However, what happens is that's kind of competition to the winemakers out of Spain, right? We love wine out of Spain to this day, but the wine has to come across the ocean, so that makes it costly. So that's why in Mexico they start making some wine for Mass and the Sacrament and table wine, etc. However, what happens is the Spanish crown doesn't like that competition, so they outlaw it. So now you have to get your shipment across the ocean. Well, if you're in New Mexico, which is further north, of course, now it has to go not only across the ocean, but the wine has to come up the El Camino Real, the Tierra Adentro, right from Mexico City all the way to this region, which is over 1,000 miles on an ox cart.
Wow.
So that's going to take a long time. You might get that shipment maybe once a year, maybe once every 2 or 3 years even, so you're not getting it very often. So in the 1580s was when the friars here in New Mexico begin to establish making wine here, violating the crown law, because they didn't want to wait that long and the cost of it. And then in 1629, there's more that takes place in northern New Mexico, because it started in southern New Mexico and moved up right around Socorro, and that's when it takes off from there.
Why did the wine here in New Mexico become so popular in the territory?
So what's interesting is that it's a couple hundred years before others in what we would now recognize as the U.S. begin to make wine, including California. So in the 1860s, you do have other wine producers around the young United States, including California. But New Mexico is actually doing incredibly well. They were the top 5 wine producer in the country. And the reason for that is that in the 1860s, you have Italian immigration from the Jesuits who come over to New Mexico. So by 1880, so very shortly thereafter, it's still in the territorial period, New Mexico is making about 1 million barrels of wine a year. Again, the 5th producer in the country. Now, that doesn't last very long. By maybe a generation later, by early 1900s, 1910 or so, it becomes virtually non-existent. It really takes a decline. A big reason for that is competition from California. That starts to take over a lot of the American market. So the New Mexico market kind of really starts to shrink. And then you have Prohibition shortly after that, which really takes it out.
How did New Mexican wines come back after Prohibition to become what we know them today? We have 6 bottles right here, and
yes.
We still have a pretty big wine-producing state
More
here.
than 50 wineries here in New Mexico, so obviously it came back after Prohibition. Some beautiful wines over there, very New Mexico. You can see in the wine that the culture and the art, sort of background of New Mexico comes through. And the way that happened is after Prohibition, there were attempts to bring it back in the 1930s. And there was about a dozen or so here in New Mexico. Didn't go very well though. By the 1970s, it starts to shrink again to about 3 or so. But there's European investors that start to see opportunity here at that time, and they start to pump some money in. And by the 1980s, the wine industry here comes up with the idea of wine festivals. And that's the key. The wine festivals help bring it back. And today, we're back up to about 1 million barrels a year. So back to the 1880s levels, which is pretty cool when you think about the history going back 400 years, the ups and downs, Prohibition, and now we're back.
And we're still having wine festivals, and I know everybody loves the Wine Fest. Rafi, where can we go for more information on wine in New Mexico and you?
For me, you can go to celebrityhistorian.com. For wine in New Mexico, there's an association for New Mexico wines that you can check out. So if you look at various New Mexico winery groups online, you will find a whole bunch of them listed and different events rather than going to a particular winery. Of course, any particular winery is good, but I like to see all of them so you can pick the different styles and locations that you like to see.
Sure. Awesome. Rafi, thank you so much for being here on National Sangria Day. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a great day.